You will take that ugly thing down, or I will make you wish you'd never been born." Those were the words Brenda hissed at me across my own freshly cut lawn, her finger jabbing the air toward the brand new aluminum tower that rose, quite legally, from my backyard. It was a statement of such pure, distilled malice that for a moment, I could only blink. It was the kind of threat you see in a bad movie, not one you hear on a sunny Tuesday in a neighborhood called Serenity Springs. This whole mess started because I wanted a little peace. My wife, Helen, had passed away the year before, and the house we'd shared for 30 years suddenly felt as vast and empty as a hangar. Every room held a ghost. So I sold it and bought a smaller place in this meticulously planned community. It looked like the perfect place to retire, to fade into the background, and to finally get serious about the hobby Helen and I had always shared, amateur radio. I'm a retired communications engineer. For 40 years, I designed and maintained the networks that keep people connected. Cellular, microwave, fiber optics, I'd had my hands in all of it. Ham radio was different. It was slower, more deliberate. It was about connecting with a single person, sometimes halfway around the world, through the crackle of static and the whims of the ionosphere. It was my connection back to Helen, in a way. She'd been the one who got me my first license. The house in Serenity Springs was perfect. It had a modest backyard, just big enough for a small garden and, more importantly, a decent antenna tower. Before I even closed on the property, I did my due diligence. I reviewed the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the dreaded CC and RS. They were thick enough to be a doorstop, filled with rules about lawn height, mailbox color, and the specific shade of beige you were allowed to paint your shutters. But I also checked federal law. Specifically, the FCC's ODERD rule. It's a beautiful piece of federal preemption that basically says no local ordinance or private agreement can stop you from putting up an antenna for receiving video or data signals, or for transmitting amateur radio signals. My tower, a modest 50-foot telescoping mast, was 100% protected. It was as legally sound as the foundation of the house itself. I filed the permits with the city, got them approved without a hitch, and had the tower professionally installed. It was a clean, elegant structure of gleaming aluminum, anchored in a block of reinforced concrete that I had engineered myself. It was, to my eyes, a thing of beauty. A ladder to the sky. Apparently, Brenda did not share my aesthetic appreciation. She was the HOA president, a title she wore like a monarch's crown. She was a woman in her late 50s with a helmet of sprayed blonde hair, a face permanently pinched in disapproval, and a wardrobe that consisted exclusively of pastel tracksuits. I first met her the day I moved in. She'd marched up my driveway, clipboard in hand, to inform me that my moving truck had violated the 2-hour commercial vehicle parking rule and that I was starting my residency with a $50 fine. I paid it just to make her go away. That was my first mistake. It taught her I was an easy mark. The tower went up on a Monday. On Tuesday morning, Brenda was on my doorstep. "What is that?" she demanded, pointing over my shoulder. No hello, no welcome to the neighborhood. Just an accusation. "Good morning to you, too," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "It's an antenna tower." "I can see that," she snapped, her voice tight with indignation. "It's hideous. It violates at least a dozen HOA rules on structures and aesthetics. You have 24 hours to remove it." I had prepared for this conversation. I had a file folder ready. "Actually," I said, trying to keep my tone friendly and informative, "it's federally protected under the FCC's ODERD rules. They supersede any local covenants. I have the documentation right here if you'd like to see it." She waved a dismissive hand, as if swatting away a fly. "I don't care about your federal rules, I care about our property values. That thing is an eyesore. It makes the whole neighborhood look like a power station." "It's a licensed amateur radio station," I corrected gently. "It's also a designated part of the county's emergency communications network." That part was true. I had registered my station with the ARES, the Amateur Radio Emergency Service. In a disaster, if cell towers and internet went down, my little setup could be a vital link to the outside world. Brenda scoffed. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Don't be ridiculous. We have phones for emergencies. Take it down." She turned on her heel and marched back across my lawn, her sneakers leaving little indentations in the dew-kissed grass. The next day, a fine for an unapproved structure was taped to my front door. It was for $500. I thought a reasonable, logical approach was still possible. I mailed a polite letter to the HOA board, with a copy to Brenda, explaining the legal situation in clear, simple terms. I included a printout of the relevant FCC regulations and a copy of my city-issued permit. I thought that would be the end of it. How naive I was. I was trying to use logic on a creature that ran on pure ego. It was like trying to reason with a hurricane. The response was a second fine, this one for $1,000, for failure to cure the initial violation. An accompanying letter, signed by Brenda, stated that their legal counsel had advised them that my interpretation of the law was erroneous and that my industrial monstrosity was a clear and present danger to the aesthetic integrity of Serenity Springs. That's when the escalation began. It started small, a campaign of petty harassment. My trash cans would be moved from the curb on collection day, earning me a citation for improper waste management. I got a notice that the small vegetable garden I'd planted, a few tomato plants and some herbs, violated the approved landscaping policy. The war was on, and it seemed I was the only one who hadn't realized it. Brenda's next move was to weaponize the community's ignorance. She posted a long, breathless screed on the official Serenity Springs neighborhood Facebook page. She didn't use my name, but it was obvious who she was talking about. She called my tower a high-powered spy antenna that could intercept private phone calls and beam dangerous radiation into people's homes. She claimed it was a health hazard to children and pets. The comments section exploded. People I'd never even met were suddenly experts in radio frequency emissions. They were worried about their Wi-Fi, their pacemakers, their property values. Fear is a powerful tool, and Brenda wielded it like a cudgel. I tried to post a calm, factual rebuttal with links to the FCC and the World Health Organization, but my comment was deleted within minutes, and I was blocked from the group. She controlled the narrative completely. Things got uglier. A week later, I came out to find my car, which was parked in my own driveway, was gone. I panicked, thinking it was stolen. A call to the police informed me it had been towed. On whose authority? The Serenity Springs HOA. The reason cited on the tow report was leaking hazardous fluids. I'd just had the car serviced, it was in perfect condition. It was a bald-faced lie, but it cost me $300 and a whole day to get my car back. I was starting to feel besieged. This wasn't the quiet life I had envisioned. It was a low-grade war of attrition. I saw Brenda on her morning patrols, a golf cart she drove around the neighborhood, her eyes lingering on my house a little too long. Neighbors who had been friendly before now averted their gazes. I was being isolated, painted as a villain. The frustration was building inside me like pressure in a faulty boiler. Every fine, every nasty comment, every sideways glance was another degree of heat. I was a man who had built his career on logic, on systems that followed predictable rules. Brenda was a chaotic force, a system error I couldn't debug. I consulted a lawyer. He was sympathetic but blunt. "You're in the right, legally," he said, leafing through my file. "But fighting an HOA is a marathon. It's expensive, it's draining, and she will drag it out as long as possible. They have the HOA's funds to fight you with. You only have yours." He quoted me a retainer that made my stomach clench. It was money I didn't really have, not after Helen's medical bills. I decided to try one last time to appeal to reason. I went to the next monthly HOA meeting, held in the community clubhouse. I sat quietly at the back, waiting for the new business portion of the agenda. When the time came, I stood up. Brenda, sitting at the head of a long table with the other board members, fixed me with a look of theatrical surprise, as if a cockroach had just addressed the room. "Yes. Do you have something to say?" I cleared my throat. "My name is Mark, and I live at 112 Willow Creek Lane. I'm here to discuss the fines levied against my property for my federally protected communications antenna." I calmly and concisely laid out my case. I talked about the law. I talked about the permits. I talked about its role in emergency services. I tried to be as non-confrontational as possible. I was speaking to the board, but my words were for the 20 or so other residents in the room. I wanted them to see I wasn't some monster. When I finished, there was a brief, uncertain silence. Then Brenda spoke, her voice dripping with condescension. Are you finished with your little speech? We have already addressed this. The board has made its decision. Your structure is a violation. The fines stand. If you don't pay them, along with the towing and administrative fees, we will place a lien on your property. Next item. It was a public execution. She hadn't just dismissed me, she had humiliated me. She had made it clear that the rules didn't matter. Her power was the only thing that mattered. As I walked back to my seat, my face burning, I felt something inside me shift. The part of me that wanted to be reasonable, that wanted to find a peaceful compromise, just died. It cracked like cheap concrete and crumbled into dust. I left the meeting before it was over. Walking home in the cool night air, I thought about Helen. She had been a fighter. She'd fought her illness with a grace and ferocity that still awed me. She never let bullies win. What would she think of me, letting this petty tyrant walk all over me? That was the turning point. Right there, under a flickering street lamp in Serenity Springs. The engineer in me took over. The part of my brain that designs systems, finds weaknesses, and solves complex problems came online. Brenda had declared war. Fine. But she had no idea who she was fighting. I wasn't just a quiet retiree. I was a man who had spent a lifetime understanding how systems work. And an HOA, I realized, is just a system. A poorly designed, easily broken system. It was time to run a full diagnostic on Brenda. The harassment had become personal, a daily grind designed to wear me down. She filed a noise complaint with the county, claiming my radio transmissions were causing unbearable static on her television and interfering with her sensitive medical equipment. A county official came out, a tired-looking man with a spectrum analyzer. He spent an hour taking readings while I ran my transmitter at full legal power. Well, he said finally, packing up his gear. Unless her medical equipment is a 1950s rabbit ear antenna, she's full of it. You're not putting out a single stray emission. Your signal is cleaner than a church choir. He wrote up his report, officially clearing me. But it was another day wasted, another indignity suffered. Brenda was using official channels as her personal bludgeon. The final straw, the one that broke the back of my patience, was her comment about my wife. I was out in my front yard, pulling weeds, when she drove by in her golf cart. She stopped right in front of my house. You know, she said, her voice loud enough for the neighbors on either side to hear, it's a shame. This house used to be so lovely before you moved in. Your late wife, what was her name? Helen. She would be ashamed of what you've done to this property. A total disgrace. Something cold and heavy settled in my chest. The world seemed to shrink down to just the space between me and her, the air buzzing with a sudden, dangerous energy. I had never laid a hand on anyone in my life, but in that moment, I understood how people could. I straightened up slowly, my hands clenched into fists full of dirt and weeds. I said nothing. I just stared at her. I let the silence stretch, letting her see the profound, bottomless rage she had just unleashed. She smirked, thinking she had won, thinking she had finally broken me. Then she zipped away in her little cart. She hadn't broken me. She had forged me into something new. The grief and exhaustion I'd been feeling were burned away, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. This was no longer about an antenna. This was about defending my home, my peace, and the memory of my wife. This was about justice. My project began that night. My first step was to stop thinking like a victim and start thinking like an engineer. I needed data. Lots of it. I went to the county records office the next morning. I spent hours pulling every public document related to the Serenity Springs HOA, their articles of incorporation, their bylaws, the minutes from every meeting for the past 5 years, and, most importantly, their annual budgets. I took it all home and spread it across my dining room table. It was a mountain of paper, a monument to bureaucratic nonsense. But somewhere in that mountain was a weakness. Every system has one. I just had to find it. I also made a call to an old friend. George had been a detective with the county sheriff's department for 30 years before retiring. We used to play poker on Friday nights. He knew how to navigate the messy intersection of civil and criminal law. "Sounds like you've got a real piece of work on your hands, Mark," he said after I laid it all out for him. His voice was a gravelly baritone that always sounded calm, even when he was talking about the worst of humanity. "You have no idea, George," I said. "She's a professional bully. These HOA tyrants are all the same," he grumbled. "They get a little bit of power and it goes to their heads like cheap whiskey. My advice: document everything. Every conversation, every letter, every little act of harassment. Create a timeline. A judge or a jury might not understand FCC regulations, but they understand a pattern of targeted abuse." I took his advice to heart. I bought a small digital voice recorder that I carried with me whenever I was outside. I installed new high-definition security cameras that covered every inch of my property, front and back. My house became a fortress of data collection. Every move Brenda made, every word she said near my property, was now being recorded, time-stamped, and archived. For days, I sifted through the HOA documents, my engineering mind looking for anomalies, for deviations from the established pattern. Most of it was boring, line items for pool chemicals, insurance premiums, legal fees. But then I found it. It was in the landscaping budget. For the past 3 years, the HOA's landscaping expenses had nearly tripled. The line item was vague: community beautification and maintenance. The payments were all going to a single vendor, a company called Bee's Best Blooms. The amounts were significant, tens of thousands of dollars a year. Yet, I looked around the neighborhood. The landscaping was fine. A few sad-looking flower beds at the entrance, regularly mowed grass in the common areas. It didn't look like a place that was spending a fortune on beautification. My curiosity piqued. I did a business search on Bee's Best Blooms. The company was registered as a sole proprietorship. The address listed was a P.O. box in the next town over. The name of the proprietor made the hair on my arm stand up. Brenda Kowalski. It was her maiden name. My heart started to beat a little faster. This wasn't just petty tyranny anymore. This was fraud. She was using the HOA's money to pay herself through a shell company for work that was either never done or was being done by a cheap mowing service for a fraction of the price. She was embezzling from her neighbors. This was the weakness I had been looking for. It was a critical system flaw. Her whole empire of petty rules and intimidation was built on a foundation of criminal activity. If I could prove it, I could bring the whole rotten structure crashing down. But I had to be smart. A direct accusation would just make her lawyer up and hide the evidence. I needed to catch her in the act. I needed to set a trap. My plan began to form, a schematic taking shape in my mind. It would be a multi-phase operation. The goal was not just to win, but to achieve a kind of poetic justice. I would use her own arrogance and the very thing she hated, my tower, to expose her. I started calling it Project Signal Integrity. The first phase was baiting the trap. I drafted a formal, certified letter addressed to the entire HOA board, with Brenda's name at the top. In the letter, I reiterated the vital role of amateur radio in emergency communications. I cited the specific clause in the HOA's own master agreement with the county, a document I'd found in my research, which stipulated that the HOA must make reasonable efforts to maintain or provide for backup communication channels in the event of a regional disaster. It was a boilerplate clause they had likely ignored for years. Then came the bait. I formally offered, at no cost to the HOA, the use of my fully licensed and operational station as the officially designated backup communication point for Serenity Springs. I offered to conduct free training sessions for any interested residents and to coordinate directly with the county's Office of Emergency Management, OEM. It was a generous, civic-minded offer that no reasonable person could refuse. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that Brenda would refuse it. She would see it as a trick, an attempt to legitimize the ugly metal monstrosity she so despised. Her ego would not allow her to accept any proposal that made my tower seem valuable or necessary. Her rejection, I hoped, would be loud, public, and documented. I sent the letter and waited. The quiet in my house felt different now. It wasn't the empty silence of grief anymore, it was the charged silence of a hunter in a blind, waiting for the quarry to step into the clearing. It didn't take long. 3 days after my letter was delivered, a notice was posted on every door in the neighborhood. An emergency HOA meeting had been called. The sole topic on the agenda, addressing resident Mark's defiant and unsafe structure, she had taken the bait hook, line, and sinker. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse was more crowded than I'd ever seen it. Brenda had whipped the neighborhood into a frenzy. People were angry, worried. They looked at me with a mixture of fear and suspicion as I took my seat in the back row. My little digital recorder was running in my shirt pocket. Brenda called the meeting to order with a bang of a gavel that was far too large for the small table she sat at. She looked severe and important, a general addressing her troops before a battle. "As you all know," she began, her voice ringing with false sincerity, "we are here tonight because of a serious threat to the safety, beauty, and property values of our community." She gestured vaguely in my direction. Despite repeated warnings and significant fines, one resident continues to defy the board and our community standards by maintaining a massive, industrial antenna in his backyard. She held up my certified letter. "Now, he has sent us this ridiculous proposal. He wants us to make his ugly metal monstrosity an official part of our community. He wants to legitimize his eyesore by wrapping it in the flag of emergency preparedness." She laughed, a short, barking sound. "Let me be perfectly clear. This board will never, ever endorse this amateur's toy. We have cell phones. We have the internet. We do not need his junk pile to keep us safe. The offer is rejected. It is insulting, and frankly, it's pathetic." It was perfect. Better than I could have hoped. She was on record, in front of dozens of witnesses, dismissing a vital safety resource out of pure personal animosity. My recorder captured every self-important word. This was Exhibit A in the case I was building against her. I let her finish her tirade. Then, when she paused for a breath, I raised my hand. "Brenda," I said, my voice calm and even. "Since we're all here and discussing community matters, I have a question about the budget, if that's all right." She looked annoyed, caught off guard. "This meeting is about your tower, not the budget." "I understand," I said. "But it's a simple question, and I'm sure all our neighbors here would be interested in the answer." I was reviewing the annual financial reports, and I noticed the landscaping expenditures have gone up by nearly 300% over the last 3 years. The payments are all going to a company called Bee's Best Blooms. Could you perhaps provide the board, and the community, with the detailed invoices for that work? Just for transparency's sake. The change in her demeanor was instantaneous. The confident, commanding general vanished, replaced by a cornered, panicked animal. Her face went pale, then blotchy red. That's completely out of order," she stammered. "The HOA's financials are confidential. How dare you make such accusations?" "I'm not making any accusations," I replied smoothly. "I'm asking a question. You're the president. You approved the payments. Surely you can explain what a nearly $250,000 beautification project entails." The room was silent. You could have heard a pin drop. My neighbors were no longer looking at me. They were all looking at Brenda, a new seed of doubt planted in their minds. Her over-the-top, furious reaction was far more damning than my simple question. The first cracks in her carefully constructed facade were starting to show, and they were spreading fast. She sputtered, declared the meeting over, and practically ran from the room. I had drawn first blood. The trap was sprung. But I knew this was just the beginning. A cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. Brenda's retaliation was swift and vicious. She was no longer trying to just annoy me into compliance, she was trying to destroy my life. The very next day, a sheriff's deputy served me with a temporary restraining order. She had filed a sworn statement claiming I was stalking her, that I had threatened her, and that she was in fear for her life. It was a complete fabrication, but the judge had signed it. I was now legally barred from coming within 100 yards of her, which was a neat trick in a neighborhood where our houses were only 50 yards apart. It was a strategic masterstroke on her part. It meant I couldn't attend HOA meetings. I couldn't even be in my own front yard if she was outside. She had effectively gagged and imprisoned me on my own property. Then she went after my neighbors. The Millers, a young couple next door with 2 small children, had been cautiously friendly to me. Brenda apparently saw this as an act of treason. She called Child Protective Services on them, making an anonymous complaint that they were endangering their children by allowing them to play near my high-radiation tower. It was a despicable act. The Millers had to endure a terrifying investigation, social workers questioning them and their children, before the complaint was, of course, dismissed as unfounded. They were traumatized. The message to the rest of the neighborhood was clear: stand with Mark, and you will be targeted. This was her fatal mistake. In trying to isolate me, she overplayed her hand. She had crossed a line from neighborhood bully to something far more sinister. She wasn't just fighting me anymore, she was terrorizing innocent people. And that woke something up in the community. The fear she had cultivated began to curdle into resentment. People were starting to see her not as a protector of property values, but as an unhinged tyrant. The final piece of the puzzle came to me not through my own investigation, but from an unlikely source. Arthur, the HOA treasurer, was a quiet, mousy man who Brenda treated like her personal servant. He was a retired accountant who had taken the volunteer position to stay busy. I'd seen the way she spoke to him at meetings, with open contempt. One evening, my doorbell rang. It was Arthur. He looked terrified, clutching a manila envelope to his chest as if it were a life raft. He was sweating despite the cool evening air. "I can't let her do this anymore," he whispered, refusing to come inside. He shoved the envelope into my hands. "She's ruining people's lives. She made me do it. She made me process the payments." He glanced nervously up and down the street. "These are the real bank statements. And the fake invoices she created for B's Best Blooms, it's all there. Please. Just don't tell her it was me." He turned and practically ran back to his house. I opened the envelope. It was the smoking gun. Neatly printed invoices for thousands of dollars worth of Japanese maple installation, perennial bed restoration, and advanced soil fertilization services that had clearly never been rendered. And alongside them, bank statements showing direct transfers from the HOA's operating account to the account of B's Best Blooms, which was then immediately transferred to Brenda's personal savings account. It was clean, undeniable proof of embezzlement and wire fraud. Arthur was my whistleblower. He had taken a huge risk, and I would not let him down. The next morning, I called George. "I've got her," I said, my voice steady and cold. "It's not just harassment anymore. It's multiple felonies." With George's guidance, I didn't go to the local police. Brenda had connections there. She was on the board of the policeman's ball or some such nonsense. This needed to be handled at a higher level. We packaged the evidence, Arthur's documents, my recordings, the timeline of harassment, the bogus restraining order, into a neat, undeniable file. George made a call to a friend of his in the state attorney's office. Simultaneously, I launched the other prong of my attack. I contacted the County Office of Emergency Management. I sent their director the recording of Brenda publicly mocking and rejecting my offer to serve as a backup communication hub. I included the relevant clause from the HOA's contract and a polite letter explaining that the HOA president was actively obstructing a vital piece of public safety infrastructure. Things began to move very quickly after that. The wheels of justice, once they finally gain purchase, can grind exceedingly fine. A week later, a notice went out from the county. The OEM was planning a major, county-wide emergency preparedness drill for the following Saturday. The scenario was a simulated catastrophic storm that would knock out all primary communication networks, cell service, internet, and landlines. As part of the drill, they would be setting up a mobile command post in Serenity Springs to test alternative and auxiliary communication links. It was the perfect stage. Brenda, in her official capacity as HOA president, was required to be there to liaise with the county officials. The entire neighborhood would be watching. The morning of the drill was overcast and gray, fitting the mood. County vehicles, news vans, I may have made an anonymous tip to a local reporter known for her investigative work, and a mobile command center trailer rolled into the common area near the clubhouse. Residents gathered, curious and a little anxious. I saw Brenda there, in her element. She was wearing a special windbreaker with HOA President embroidered on it. She was directing county officials, pointing fingers, trying to look important. She saw me standing on my porch, watching, and shot me a look of pure, triumphant hatred. She thought this was her show. She had no idea she was the guest of honor at her own execution. I went inside to my radio shack. I powered up the equipment, checked the antenna tuning, and waited. On a special frequency I had coordinated with the OEM, I could hear their chatter as the drill began. Command, this is Field Unit 1. Per the drill scenario, we are simulating a total loss of the cellular network. Switching to primary satellite link. Over. A pause. Command, Field Unit 1. Negative contact on the SAT link. It appears to be down. Switching to county-wide radio network. Over. Another, longer pause. The script was playing out perfectly. Command, Field Unit 1. We are getting nothing but static on the county band. It seems the repeater on Red Mountain has been knocked out by the simulated storm. We are officially in the dark. That was my cue. Outside, I could see the county emergency manager, a serious-looking man named Director Evans, talking to Brenda. His expression was grim. I saw him point to his dead satellite phone, then to his silent radio. This was the moment. The public unmasking. I watched as Evans turned to Brenda, his voice loud enough for the assembled crowd and the news cameras to hear. Ma'am, your community's contract with the county requires you to provide for backup communications. We are cut off. What is your plan? Brenda's confident facade began to crumble. Well. We have phones, she stammered, her voice suddenly small. Your phones are dead, ma'am, Evans said, his patience wearing thin. The entire point of this drill is to test what happens when the normal systems fail. Now, my records show that a federally licensed auxiliary communications operator in this very neighborhood, a Mr. Mark, made a formal offer to designate his station as a no-cost backup solution for this community. My records also show that you, as HOA president, officially and publicly rejected that offer. Can you tell me why? Every eye turned to Brenda. The news camera zoomed in on her face. She was trapped, illuminated in a spotlight of her own making. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish gasping for air. Director Evans didn't wait for an answer. He looked across the lawn, directly at my house. He raised a handheld radio. Auxiliary Station K4EGA, this is County OEM. Do you copy? I picked up my microphone. My voice was calm and clear as I pressed the transmit button. County OEM, this is K4EGA. I read you 5x9. How can I help, Director? A collective gasp went through the crowd. The connection was crystal clear, cutting through the silence like a knife. K4EGA, Evans said, a small smile playing on his lips, I need a patch through to the State Emergency Operations Center in the capital. Can you handle that? Stand by, OEM, I replied. I spun a dial, my fingers moving with practiced ease. Within 30 seconds, I had established a link with a repeater 200 miles away, which was connected to the state's emergency network. OEM, your patch is live. You are connected to the state EOC. As Director Evans began relaying his status report over my amateur's toy, proving its indisputable value in a crisis, Brenda finally snapped. The last thread of her composure broke. It's a trick, she shrieked, her voice a raw, desperate screech. It's a setup. He's a con artist. He's the criminal. He's been harassing me. Her meltdown was spectacular. She was raving, pointing at me, her face contorted in a mask of pure fury. But it was too late. No one was listening to her. They were watching the men in the house she'd terrorized single-handedly restore order to the chaos. And then, as if on cue, a quiet, unmarked sedan pulled up to the curb. Two people in plain clothes got out, a man and a woman. They walked calmly but purposefully through the crowd, their eyes locked on Brenda. They flashed badges. Brenda Kowalski, the woman asked, her voice devoid of emotion. We're from the state attorney's office. You're under arrest for multiple counts of embezzlement and wire fraud. The scene descended into surreal theater. As one of the detectives began to cuff her, Brenda's rage imploded into a full-blown public breakdown. She tried to pull away, screaming that it was all a lie, a conspiracy orchestrated by me. She incriminated herself further, babbling about the landscaping company and how she deserved that money for all the hard work she did for the ungrateful community. As they finally led her, struggling and weeping, toward their car, she made eye contact with me one last time. I was standing on my porch, watching the system I had set in motion reach its inevitable conclusion. "You'll pay for this," she screamed, her voice hoarse. "I'll ruin you. Do you hear me? I will ruin you." It was her final, impotent threat. A hollow echo of the power she once had. No one flinched. No one seemed to care. The queen was deposed, and her kingdom of petty tyranny had vanished with the click of handcuffs. The aftermath was like the air after a violent thunderstorm, clean, calm, and strangely quiet. The community was in shock, but it was a shock that quickly gave way to a profound sense of relief. The monster who had been tormenting them was gone. The story of Brenda's reign and her dramatic downfall became neighborhood legend. The HOA was summarily dissolved by a vote of the residents. The ridiculous rules, the constant threat of fines, the culture of fear, it all vanished overnight. A new, much simpler neighborhood association was formed, with a board of volunteers who actually seemed to care about the community rather than controlling it. Their first official act was to pass a resolution formally thanking me and designating my tower as an official piece of community infrastructure, with a small annual stipend from the association to cover its maintenance. Brenda's fate was a textbook case of justice served cold. Faced with the mountain of evidence from Arthur and my meticulous documentation, she took a plea deal. She was convicted on multiple felony counts and sentenced to 5 years in state prison. The court ordered full restitution of the $250,000 she had stolen. She was forced to sell her house, at a loss, to pay back the neighbors she had defrauded. Her husband, who claimed to have known nothing, quietly divorced her while she was awaiting sentencing. She lost everything, her freedom, her money, her family, and the social status she so desperately craved. She had become a ghost in the community she once ruled. I found myself an accidental hero, a role I was deeply uncomfortable with. Neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid me now brought over plates of cookies and bottles of wine. They stopped me on my walks to thank me. The Millers gave me a hug that felt like it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. I was grateful, but all I had ever really wanted was to be left alone. In the quiet months that followed, I finally found the peace I had been looking for. The house no longer felt empty. It felt like a sanctuary, a home I had fought for and won. I spent my mornings in the garden and my afternoons in my radio shack. The tower in my backyard no longer felt like a point of contention. It stood tall and silent, a symbol not of a bitter fight, but of resilience. Sometimes, late at night, when the world was asleep, I would sit in the soft glow of my equipment, tuning the dial. I'd listen to the faint, ghostly voices bouncing off the ionosphere from thousands of miles away. A trucker in Australia, a scientist in Antarctica, a fellow hobbyist in Japan. We were all connected by this invisible web, this shared passion. I thought about Brenda and the ugly, small world she had built for herself, a world defined by control and power over a few square blocks. And I thought about the vast, open world my tower connected me to. She had tried to tear it down, but in the end, she had only succeeded in tearing down herself. I had learned that standing up to a bully isn't just about winning a fight. It's about defending the principle that people should be able to live in peace, free from the whims of petty tyrants. It was a lesson Helen had taught me long ago, and one I had finally taken to heart. My little war was over. And in the quiet hum of the radio, in the crackle of a distant voice, I had finally, truly, come home. The peace was real now, earned and unbreakable.